connecting. Perfect. So we should start to see people come in. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. Welcome to the first of our 3-day panel events. I'm very excited. I see some familiar names as well, which is lovely. I see Shay. Nice to see you, Shay. Helen Starbuck. Nice to see you. Fantastic. I'm going to give it a few more minutes just to let people find their way to us, get signed in and logged in. And then I will start the introductions. Marie, you are on it. We have Marie from Puerto Rico. Welcome. I'm finding learning more and more people live there. It seems to be a very popular place at the moment. I think I must be missing out on something. I have to add that to my list of places to visit. Fantastic. Okay. Brilliant. Well, why don't we get started and honor everybody's time, particularly our panel here today. So welcome to day one. I'm very excited to be here amongst these great writers, and I'm going to learn some more about how they work and how they approach their storytelling, which I'm very excited about. But I thought I should start by introducing myself, because not everybody will know me, but I'm Emma Desi. I write contemporary women's fiction, but I am also a book coach, and I help beginner writers write their first novel, their first draft. So I get the thrill of seeing new burgeoning writers spark into life, which is great fun. But out of curiosity, I'd like to know a little bit more about you who are here today with us. And I'd love to know if we have writers, readers, or a mixture of both in our audience today. So if you are solely a reader, I'd love it if you could put an R in the chat. If you're a writer, to put a W. And then obviously if you do both, put both or a B, and kind of let us know what you do, where your passion is, and if you're here to kind of learn a little bit about craft, or here to listen to some of your favorite writers and learn how they do it. So I'd love to hear. We've got some both, yeah, readers and writers. Both writers, both readers and writers. Great, okay. Everyone's, I think, doing both. So that's brilliant. Bonjour, Liz, a Brit living in France. Ralph from Chicago. Hi, Ralph. Fantastic. Lovely. Right, so today I'm here, as I say, with these very experienced writers who are going to share their knowledge and their expertise with us. And so given that we are all writers here, I know we're all going to learn something new, a little nugget of gold that perhaps we didn't know before, or that we will be reminded of and be able to incorporate it into our own writing and help just kind of lift it that little bit more. I'm going to go around the room and just introduce everybody very briefly, because we do want to get into the questions, into the heart of it. So I'd love to introduce Barbara Conray. Barbara is the US Today best-selling author of Nowhere Near Goodbye, published in 2020 by Red Adept Publishing. We have Julie Valerie. Julie is the best-selling author of Holly Banks Full of Angst, which I love, and The Peculiar Fate of Holly Banks, books 1 and 2 in the Village of Prim series. We have Samantha Scow. Sam is an agented thriller author currently working on her debut novel. She is proud to be an Author Accelerator certified fiction book coach through the Book Coach certification program. We have Mandy Hayes. Mandy is the author of 3 books, Walking the Wrong Way Home, Sharp as a Serpent's Tooth, and Oliver, and she's currently working on her 4th. Mary Helen Sheriff. Mary is the award-winning author of Boop and Eve's Road Trip, which was published in October 2020. And of course, Grace Salmon. Grace is an American Book Fest finalist and the author of The Eves, which was also published in 2020. So 2020 was a good year for the authors in this group today. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Now, for our viewers, for our listeners, if you have any questions for our guests today, what I would love for you to do, if I can just find it, along the bottom of your screen, you should find a Q&A box, and I'd love it if you could put your questions in there. And the reason I ask you to do that is because it's too easy for me to miss them when your questions come up in the chat. And if the chat takes off, then there's a good chance I'll miss the question. And I'd really love to be able to have the opportunity to answer everybody's questions with the panel. So do be sure to do that. But with that in mind, I shall crack on with my first question. So my first question for everybody is, do your characters come to you fully formed and you can see them there and then? Or do they tend to be a sort of glimmer of a person and it evolves as you write the story? And Barbara, I wonder if we could perhaps start with you.
Okay. Well, my characters do not come fully formed. I get a very tiny glimpse. In fact, in Nowhere Near Goodbye, my primary character was going to be a character by the name of Kate, who is the child who died of a brain tumor. And instead, the entire book turned out to be about Emma, Kate's best friend, who grew up to be a pediatric oncologist and found the fictional cure for this very real brain tumor.
And so what brought about that change in the kind of focus of the character? Did Emma just speak to you more? Did you just find her more interesting and she called you in?
Yes, I'm a big believer in meditation. And I was meditating one morning and I thought, Kate needs a friend. So Emma was just going to be a friend. And then Emma literally took over. And it was beautiful. It was magical. And I love when that happens. That's like my favorite part of writing.
Those little moments of magic. Yes.
Yes.
Mary, what about you?
Somewhat similar to that. When I started writing this book, I did start with the characters. So I did a lot of journaling before I ever started writing a draft and before I even had a plot. And so I did know them well, but as things happen to the characters, they change. and so then they flesh out even more, or things just even kind of change about them. And I had a similar experience to Barbara's, where this was going to be Eve's road trip. And Boop was going to be a character, but she decided she wanted half the book. So there you go.
So did that mean that you moved from having one point of view character and then you had 2 points of view characters?
Yeah, I did. I was initially the whole book was in first person, and I was gonna have, Boop occasionally pop in with a first person chapter. But then, she popped in every other chapter.
And Sam, how about you? So you're in the stage of drafting at the moment, you're revising and editing. How is that going? Have you seen that your characters are changing, or did you feel pretty solid about it before you started writing?
So I draw inspiration from real life, and they tend to be amalgamations of people that I know, so I'll take something that that I've done, and then I'll put it with somebody that I admire, and then I'll pull this, misbelief from somebody else and end up with somebody that is, more or less a formed person. But similar to Mary, I have 2 POVs now, and I started off with one because one of them took over, and she's just really interesting, and she deserves to have her story told as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I think I'm maybe seeing a bit of a theme here, that characters take over and that they're kind of emerging as the story goes. Now, Grace, I know that you had lots of characters. You had a big cast of characters in the Eves. How did you find pulling all of those people together and telling your main protagonist's story?
Well, I think in some ways I'm like Sam in that I take amalgamations of people that I know. And I think that's very typical in a debut novel. Even though I've written 3 other books, my book, The Eves, is a debut. And I think we do what we know best in those debuts. So Those characters are very diverse, but there used to be an even larger cast of characters. But then when I figured out I couldn't keep them straight, I knew that the reader wouldn't be able to keep them straight. So then those characters got condensed a little bit more to a more manageable group, but I still wanted to get those voices across. So then I had to do a little bit of charting out of how do I get those points across? Because for me, it was very important to have a diverse cast, if you will. There's African Americans, there's people who are Native Americans, there's white people. I think that it was really important for me to have both that diversity, but also the diversity of age, so that I could challenge my younger self and my older self. So the youngest character is 15 and the oldest one is in their 90s. But in order to get that main character across, I just made her a hot, sloppy mess.
Love it.
That's good.
And Julie, what about you?
The two main characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, definitely were formed in very strong voices. But I did take a hard look at the craft of developing characters, and for the other characters, figuring out who needed to be the foil. Do I need a sidekick? Who's the mentor and the guide? Is there a love interest? Is it a temptress or a confidant or a spouse? And so I did analyze the different character types available to me to tell the story, and figured out all of the other characters as they relate to the plot and what I needed to have happen. But the protagonist, or the antagonist in particular, I use her for in satire. So I turned the volume up on her a little bit. So I needed to hear her voice. And I ended up writing the entire first draft of the novel in second person point of view, with just her speaking to me. And so my idea behind that was just her on the page, and almost as if the reader is the protagonist or the hero in the story, and this character is coming at you. So I wrote it all down just so I could hear her voice and adjust her voice and try to get her on the page. She's kind of larger than life on purpose because, like I said, I use her for moments of satire. So once I did that, I layered in the protagonist, Holly Banks. And when I did that draft, I wrote that all in first person point of view. And then the final version of the book was published in third person point of view, and that had all the characters present. So a lot of POV choices I made based on the characters. But I also, besides those two main characters, fleshed out the others based on traditional craft, types of characters and who you would need to, progress the story.
And so that was sort of planned out ahead of time. Was it, did you kind of know this, okay, I'm going to have these characters, or did they come to you and then you decided who they would be?
I would say three parts. Mary Margaret St. James was coming on strong. She was just very, very strong and very much in my head. And she was the kind of odd character that I needed to get balance on the page. She was the second person point of view character that I needed to know who she was and how she spoke, what she was motivated by, what her wound was, what she wanted to have happen in the story. Because it's important to remember that even the antagonists think they're the protagonist in the story, and they have motivations and desires to move the story. And then part two would be layering Holly in. Holly is the titular, I can never say that word without giggling. She's the character. She's the character in the title of the books. And so she had certain goals that I needed to nail with her, developing her, because she carries the title of the books in the series. So that was phase two. And then certainly phase three was how everybody else works as they relate to character arcs, who's doing what, how it pins to the story and the plot. So I think it was more of a three-part experience for me.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said there about the protagonist, the antagonist being the lead role in their own story. And in fact, this is something that Sam was saying to me just the other day, because I was having trouble writing a baddie and wanting to protect that baddie and not wanting to make him evil. But that was such a good reminder that they are the hero of their own story and they deserve to be as bad as they need to be. Yeah. Mandy, what about you?
Well, I am not a planner at all. The characters always come first. So my first two collections were short stories. So there are lots of characters. And I just sort of let them tell me how it's going to go. I'll see somebody at a grocery store, or somebody that I, had an encounter with, or a memory, from childhood. And I think that would be a good story. And I've so lucky that I've sort of trained myself to, once I've got an idea, I can dream it. So before I fall asleep,
Oh,
I think of it, like, and I'll tell myself, all right, work this out. And I just let the characters, they do it. So sometimes what I thought would be the main character turns into a side character, and a new person will show up. And they come, it gives me chill bumps because it's so weird. I've been doing this for, golly, started 12 years ago, and the first short stories, it still gives me chill bumps because it just works that way. It's like, I cannot wait to see who they are.
And so it does sound, Len, from what everybody's been saying, that a lot of it comes from the character first, and then often the story perhaps evolves or takes some solid form once you know who is going to be taking part in the story, who's going to be in it. So we've got a character here, and the two questions that we often see when we look online or we read books, the two questions we're always told to ask is, what does your character want and what does your character need? And these can be so hard to answer with depth and with real kind of understanding. So how do you approach those? Are those questions again that you ask ahead of time, or do they come to you as you're writing and as you get to know this character better? Maybe Mary, I could start with you this time. Oh, you're on mute, my dear.
I think that I think you have to start with your character wanting something at the very least, at bare minimum. And then whether you know what they actually need or not I feel like that may evolve as the story goes. Because sometimes especially if those two things are different, if what they want and what they need aren't the same. But I mean, I'm working on a book right now, which is dystopian, and it's set in the future. And I think that in that case, because the themes of the book are sort of where the story came from, it was really important for me to have those questions fully fleshed out before I started writing, because there's conspiracies and secrets and all kinds of layers in the plot that if I wasn't clear on that character part, I think it would have gotten lost.
And so did you spend a bit of time thinking about that then before?
I did with each of the characters, particularly the antagonist and the protagonist, but all of them, there's lots of different worlds. So it's just because the more complicated the story gets, the more important I feel like that question is, versus when I read this book, we were evolving as we were writing, and it was okay if all of a sudden halfway through I was like, ooh, she's wanted this, but what she really needs is this. I can go back and fix that, but the more complicated plot line is requiring me to have more answers before I get going, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I can see everybody nodding there that's so a sort of good tip for anybody listening is, if you are writing maybe a multi-universe story or something like that, then it is a good idea to think about these things ahead of time. Barbara, what about you?
okay. Well, with Nowhere Near Goodbye, Emma wanted two things. She wanted to become a pediatric oncologist and find a cure for glioblastoma, which is the brain tumor. She also wanted a child. It turns out she got both things, but she had to give up her child in order to finish her research and find a cure. Now, what this did was make a whole lot of people not like me because Emma was very dedicated and she was not a good mother. She does have a resolution to this, and she does redeem herself by the end of the book. Now, in my new book, which will be released the end of August, the main character there is Miss Maggie, and she wants two things. She wants to love who she loves, and she wants to find the answer to a 40-year-old secret that nearly destroyed her life. Again, she does get both things, but she gives up an awful lot.
Some tough decisions there for both characters in both books. Wow. Mandy, what about yourself? Thinking about short stories, perhaps as opposed to longer form, is that something that comes up in short story form as well, the having that want and that need?
It does, you know, and it's funny because people who don't write short stories are like, oh, they're so hard, you know, because you only have a short amount of time. It's the same thing. Like, well, my short stories are. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like, I'm not a big fan of short stories that are just like a vignette, you know, that leave you hanging, you know. So when working on this novel, it is harder. And like Julie was saying, how 3 rewrites, like first person, second, and then third. It's like, oh, it's a lot of work. That's why I made that face, because it is hard. So I had my character first, and I knew her story. And there's 2 characters, it's an aunt and her niece. And I had to decide what it was that what the end result, you know, like what it was. Because it was splitting off. There was so much. So yeah, I had to work a little harder at that, you know. It's to condense. It's like and I'm like, I've got 3 novels out of this, because it could go so many ways, but it can't go. It can only go one way. So.
And so was that something again that you were working on as you went along, or something that you decided you needed to give some thought to straight away?
Well, I thought, because I'm lazy too, I thought the characters would figure it out for me. But a novel length, you know, compared to shorts, it's like, no, because then you just have more. You've got, you know, more pages, more words, more. And it's like, oh, I had to roar, you know, like pull Corey, that's the main character, back in, because it's like, she's as bad as I am to, you know, go off on a tangent. So I thought I thought it was just going to happen, but you know, you really do have to work. I had to work harder on it.
Yeah. Julie, give me your
I was
thoughts.
going to just throw out there for any of the writers listening, when you're developing the motivation for your character, often there's an external motivation and there's an internal motivation. And many times the external motivation is attached to the plot, like they want to do this and this helps to fuel the plot and the actions that they take. But what's really nice for the reader is to discover and pick up clues along the way to where they see what the real internal motivation is for the character. And often that's tied to their backstory or their wound, or it could be something basic as they just want to be loved or recognized, or could be some simple concept that later comes to represent the entire piece of work. It might become the theme of the novel, and you can drop in little symbols to help support it, and you can like slowly tease it out. A lot of times it's the thing that's the most rewarding for the reader, because they're reading to pick up clues and to figure it out themselves. So often it's the internal motivation that the reader can start to pick out. It's what book clubs talk about. And it's very rewarding when you figure it out. Sometimes it's not fully revealed until the end of the book, but it makes the story more rich and more than just simply about, I want to get the gold treasure, I'm going to slay the dragon. Usually there's so much more involved. So there's multiple layers when you're developing character motivation.
And that's how readers feel connected to characters.
Yes.
That internal struggle, because then it's like, that's where they make those connections.
It makes evil characters more 3-dimensional when you understand where they're coming from. And it's also what makes anti-heroes work. So why are we rooting for, you know, the Michael Corleone and the Godfather? He's, you know, a bad guy. He does terrible things, but those layers and the things that motivate him and his wound and things, when you understand the underbelly of who he is, it's why we allow ourselves to root for somebody who is technically a really bad guy. So it helps the anti-heroes work. It certainly helps the protagonists work and be relatable. But it also makes the bad guys be more complex and the story more rewarding.
Sam, I know this is something you work a lot with in your coaching.
Yeah.
Can you relate to what Julie's saying?
Oh, absolutely. Everything that everyone's saying. So I I tend to start off with an idea of something that's happened to somebody, because again, I write thrillers and mysteries, so it's all pretty scary stuff. And so I'll think of like a terrible thing and then the person that it happened to, and then I'll kind of work out from there. And when I'm getting into the character motivations, it's people will tell you, you might hear this sometimes, that thrillers don't need as much character development as like women's fiction or literary fiction or what have you. I think that's totally false. I think that, you know, the best books that I've read, and again, I gravitate toward thrillers and mysteries, but those best books are the ones where I relate to the character and I understand why they're doing what they're doing. So, you know, yeah, to Emma's point, this is something I work on with every single one of my clients. It's like, I'm always asking why are they doing that? And why isn't it on the page? And get it on the page, you know, let the reader into their head. And so when I start off developing a character, I do the 5 why thing, which is so classic. You know, it's like, okay, I want, I don't know, to win the lottery. That's a stupid one. I want to get my PhD. Why do you want that? Because I want recognition. Why do you want that? Because my mother didn't love me, which isn't true. Why do you want that? Like, you know, whatever it is. And it always comes down to what Julie said, like something very basic. We all have these needs in our heart to be loved, and those are the relatable universal themes that draw readers in because they get it. So you can have your character, your villain, be doing something horrible, but if you understand why they're doing it, why they think it's the right thing to do because they're the hero of their own story, then all of a sudden you're drawn in and you're rooting for them. So basically what everyone else said, that's right up my alley.
But that's a great tip that you've given anybody who hasn't come across that, the 5 whys. That will answer a lot for people. Yeah. I think
and it's tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Grace, your book really delved into a lot of emotion and needs and wants and things. How did you work with that?
Well, there's several things though here that I want to say. First of all, I always love listening to Julie, who talks about writing in a way that my brain never goes. So when I listen to Julie, and I just say to myself, oh, I should take notes for my next book because I'm much more organic in general. You know, I don't ask some of those really important questions. I hope I get there, but I'm not as systemic or as, I'm a planner and a plotter, but I'm not that, okay, who's the antagonist? And I don't do that layering. And I think that makes us all better writers if we think about the craft of writing more. I would say in my novel, The Eves, what Jessica wants is to hide. She just wants to stay in her house, drink vodka, tell her little lie, and move on with her, and not move on with her life. So what she wants is not what she needs and is not what she gets. And it is because she is broken. And I hear our friend Lainey Cameron talk about this sometimes. She talks about pet the cat. You know, you have to have that person who you don't normally like. And I think, Emma, you and I talked about unlikable characters when I was gifted to be on your podcast. You have to still make them somehow likable. So in my character, she didn't know what she wanted except to hide. That's not what she needed. But I think the why question is most important. And I don't even know that it's the why for the character. It's got to be first the why for the book. And that's something that my publisher sat me down the first day we sat down and talked. And he was like, why are you going to write this book? And I said, because I want to. And he goes, no, why do you want to? And I was like, because I think it's a good idea. And those whys, if you can't get to the why you are writing the book, then I think you really aren't maybe ready to write except for yourself. And then that's really an okay answer too. I'm just writing for myself. So, but that why you're doing it is critical to the start for me.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. It's hard sometimes to articulate that though, isn't it? As you say, I just had this idea, I wanted to write about it, I want to write a book, but kind of digging down as to what is connecting us as the writer, the creator, to this particular character, this particular story, it can take some digging. And sometimes, in my own experience anyway, it hasn't come to me till sort of halfway through the process. And I've had to revisit that question again and again. And finally, when the answer comes, it's like, oh, now everything falls into place and I can see why it's so important and why I want to spend so much time working and sweating over this story and why it's so important. So yeah, well said, well said. I just want to remind our listeners, if you do have a question, please do put it into the Q&A box, which you'll find along the bottom of the screen, and that way I won't miss any questions that come in if through, missing through the chat box. So do put them in the Q&A. So thinking about developing our characters, perhaps we've established what they want and what they need. I do hear a lot of people say, okay, now you've got to get to know that character more than you know your mother, more than you know yourself. You've got to know everything about them. Where do they shop? What's their favorite color? All of those little details. And we see a lot of sort of online questionnaires that we can download and fill in. Do you use those? Do you find those helpful? Are these a way into your character, or do you have another way of getting under the skin of them, if you like? Grace, why don't I start with you this time?
I have no idea. And I write in first person a lot. The character of Jessica is in my head, and the audience spends a lot of time in her head. So I don't know that Jessica thinks like, I'm going to go down and go shopping here. I have a sense of my characters, but as I interview authors on my podcast and my radio show, what I'm really drawn to now is that real sense of deep texture that I experience with an author. And that's something that I'm going to be layering in more, to use Julie's term. I'm going to be layering in more to the current novel that I'm working on, where you have a much more tactile sense of not just, she threw on her running shoes. She's going to throw on her running shoes that are too tight for her feet, or that are, whatever that layer of detail is, because I'm very, very drawn to that now in the books that I'm reading for the authors that I interview. But no, it's not organic. And in some cases, I think all of us would say characters pop up. And I love that Sam's a developmental, book coach, editor here, because in my novel, there's a character that I didn't want even in the novel, but my beta readers kept on saying, that person needs to show up. And I kept on saying, no, they don't, no, they don't. So I like that those things get presented not only by coaches that we might be working with, but also by beta readers who help us realize that you have a better texture if you add a certain character.
Mandy, what about you? Do you use these? How do you get to know your characters? Do you like to use these questionnaires, or?
No, I'm not I don't like questionnaires, and I don't like extra paperwork, homework stuff. What I do is I try to look out through my character's eyes, even the smallest ones, even somebody that's only on there for a paragraph. I try to see what they say, and smells. So Corey, she smells like rosemary and lavender. And Charlotte, the young one, she smells like fresh cut grass and sunshine. That's sort of how I don't know. That's I don't know. That's all I need to know I will just where they are by looking through their eyes. So I have the whole room. It is weird. I've never thought of it because I thought, I don't put that much work into it. But then I do know what they're wearing, where they are.
Yeah, I love the olfactory sense of it. It's so important to you that you know how your characters smell. I think that's lovely. I'm gonna steal that. I think that's a great idea. And Julie, what about you? Do you interview your characters at all?
Well, yeah, I do lots of different things, but I keep thinking that I wanted to add to the conversation. There's lots of ways that you can convey information about the character. So you can learn a lot about a character based on how other characters treat them, or respond to them, or react to them when they walk into a room. You can tell a lot about a character when the stakes are high compared to when there's places in the story where the stakes are not super high. Sometimes you see, if you really know what somebody's made of when the stakes are high, and the stakes can reveal a lot about that character. You can learn a lot about a character based on the relationships. Is this a very lonely character? Why are they lonely? Is this a character that seems to get into everybody else's business? Why are they doing that? So there's lots of different weighs in the story in terms of technique and craft to be able to reveal the character, you probably don't want to info dump and say in a paragraph, she was a 30-year-old woman who always loved the big city, you know, that kind of stuff, because those are just character dumps and you're just kind of taking those worksheets and spilling it into a paragraph. You probably also want to be careful that you don't use dialogue as a crutch to where people are sitting over coffee and it's like, well, you know, when I was in graduate school, I fell in love, you know, so you want to be careful that you're not doing those surface level. Some of it might happen, but there's so much more available to you as a storyteller to get information about the character on the page. And sometimes a little mystery, like I said, the reader's always reading to try to figure it out. And so it could be that if a character does something that is surprising or can't be explained or is a mystery, sometimes that's a thing that that's the hook. The reader will be like, why did she say that? Why did she do that? Why would a mother do that to her child? Or why would a man treat a woman that way? Or whatever the situation might be. So sometimes there's a story or a surprise or something that doesn't make sense to you. And it could be the hook that, or it could be a situational, like, how is this character going to survive this? I'm going to watch just to see the train wreck or to see how everybody comes, if they come out okay. So there's lots of ways in to get your character on the page, and be wary of those worksheets and be wary of the temptation to just dump it into, just to tell the reader in a paragraph. There's a lot more available to you.
Just on the subject of info dumping, obviously we don't want that in the end, but I was wondering what you think about including that in a first draft when you're still kind of telling yourself the story. Do you think it's okay to include it then?
Absolutely. My first drafts have different colored ink. I've got notes on the side. I turn on track changes on Microsoft. I've got a spiral notebook. I use Scrivener and Microsoft at the same time. So like I do lots of different things, but ask me the question again, because the answer just slipped away from me.
Do you think it's acceptable or okay to kind of info dump in that first draft?
When you need to info dump, and you should never elect to info dump when you need to do it, ask yourself a couple questions in terms of when it gets to the final draft. Is it something that you need to accelerate pacing, where you're like, this is the fight scene at the end, this is the climax, I can't spend 3 paragraphs explaining the sword or something, like I should have done that earlier. So be careful where info dumps are placed. Be careful about the length, the word count that you use to info dump. Be careful that you're not telling. Be careful that you're not slowing the pace. So like if you intuit that you're about to dump some information, you better earn it. Like there better be a reason, and then be careful how you do it and where you do it and everything else. So like that's its own thing to look at, I think.
And Barbara, what about yourself? Do you do any kind of these questionnaires or journaling or diaries for your character to start to get to know them?
No. In fact, I actually kind of cringe when I see those. And I know that for some authors, they are welcome. I mean, I know that some authors like this, but I don't. My characters, from the moment I start writing, they are in my head. They are in my head to the point where I am constantly having conversations with them. And people, I don't hear what people talk to me about, like real people. It's like, I get, where are you right now? And I am not in that moment. I am in my own moment, in my head, working out things, and it's constant. And that's why I do things that let my brain work on what my characters are saying. The one is meditation, but another one is quilting. Another one is knitting, things that keep my hands busy, but leave my brain free. And that helps me enormously. But I literally cringe when I see, and I know there is a purpose for those charts that say, you know, Mary favored pink and Grace, you know, Grace talked a lot and, you know, whatever, but it's not for me.
Mhm. So it sounds like you're actually having dialogue with your character.
Oh, constantly, constantly. But what's amazing is once I am through the final edits and I know there is nothing, the book is now out of my hands. Like, for instance, I just handed in the final edits on my second book a couple of weeks ago. I can't do anything to that book anymore. Those people are gone. I've already moved on to the third book. I mean, I wiped them out so fast, and I don't think about them again until I have to start talking about them. And this can be a problem because I've done book clubs where readers are so invested in my characters. And I sit there and I listen to them and I think, did I write that? It's like, I am lost. It's like they have taken what I've written and imagined their own scenarios, which in some cases are so much better than what I wrote. You know, it's like, it's just amazing. So no, they're gone. It's like, yeah,
Wrote, that's it.
yeah, it's right. I don't need them anymore. You know, it's like, so yes, that's how I do it.
And Mary, what about yourself? How do you find that way in?
Well, I tried the little profiles. I think in the end, I find them kind of useless. But what I do find really helpful is like a diary from the character's point of view. And asking even random questions that aren't important, like what would I do if I won a lottery ticket? It has nothing to do with my book, but it says a lot about what the person values. And just kind of getting to know them and making them seem more real. What's my deepest fear? What did I dream last night? What do I have for breakfast? Like, and making myself say, what did I have for breakfast? But then write about it for like 10 or 15 minutes because you get well past what you had for breakfast, right? Like you talk about how you felt about what you had for breakfast, you know, like I had a pastry, but I should have had oatmeal. Why should I have had oatmeal? Because I've been trying to lose weight. And, you know, you kind of have like this
rewriting.
Yeah. So I do find that kind of thing really helpful. And then I do find after I'm done with a draft, I am not always the best at like some of the finer details. So sometimes I have to think about like, how does this person talk? Do they ramble? Do they talk shortly? And then I'll go through the whole book and look at their dialogue and say, okay, like, you know, this person uses big words. Are there places I could throw in some big words? Or this person doesn't shut up. I should have them like getting cut off all the time, you know, like, and being really conscious of that and like giving each character maybe a certain mannerism, not overdoing it, which can be tricky for me, but you know, making it so that they all kind of have like something that's sort of unique and sets them apart in terms of the way their body moves, maybe in terms of the way they look. I'm not going to go into some super long description of a person, but everybody has maybe something that's kind of unique. Somebody maybe has really big hands. And so here and there, you mention something about their hands. I don't know. But anyway, so I kind of go at some of those profile things later in the book, once I actually have a real character. And then I think, okay, well, where would this character go to the grocery store? Now that I actually know the character, and now they're going to go to the grocery store, perhaps I mention the store name. Maybe not, because that's weird, but you know, that kind of idea of using some of those, asking some of those questions, but after I know the person, to add detail and texture, as Grace was saying, versus starting with those details, which I kind of find useless.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like that. The fact that you're able, once you know your character better, that you're able to then insert those little moments that just give it specificity and
yeah. So for the detail, you've developed their character, but those are details. Once you actually already know them, versus like trying to get to know them through details. I don't know, it just feels backward to me.
And what about you, Sam? For your own writing, how do you find that? Do you use those? Do you find them useful? Do you
No,
any students who do?
I personally really don't like them, but I don't tell people not to use them if their brain works that way, right? Like everybody's brain works differently. And so if that floats your boat, then by all means. But for me, I like to just picture, I get to the point where I picture my character, and usually that comes on kind of strong. I know who this person is. They're always women. And so I put her, you know, in a kayak or whatever. Like my second book is sorry for everyone who's sensitive to thrillers and mysteries, but like she's in a kayak and she finds a dead body. And so, like that sort of thing, it's like that shows you who they are. And so usually I'll end up writing, 8, 10, 15,000 words and just let it go without worrying about the plot. So in that way, somebody asked the question, are we plotters, pantsers, or hybrid? I'm very much a hybrid. I pants until I can't, and then I plot the rest. And sometimes that means going back and getting rid of the first 15,000 words, which I don't recommend. But yeah, and with my clients, no, I mean, the why, the internal why, somebody said internal and external, 2 thumbs up for that. That's so important because they're often so different and they often end up sort of feeding into each other at the end. And so I make my clients identify those things, and I try to do it myself. I'm not the best at it, to be honest. But usually it's just putting them on a page and seeing what they do. And then those little micro characterizations pop out. This woman in the boat, she lives on a houseboat and has a cat. And I didn't know that until she went home from the kayaking trip. It kind of, and so, yeah, for me, it comes easily, although I'm very jealous of Mandy's dreaming. I wish I could do that.
Serious?
Just start like when you go to bed at night, because I've never had anybody tell me that or anything. I would just be thinking of it, and then it's like it just started happening. And,
I'm going to try that tonight.
Well, now, ladies, I'm conscious of time. We're almost at an hour and we do have some questions. So if you're okay, I might just ask a couple of people to answer each one, and we'll try and get wrapped up and honor everybody's time. But so yeah, Sam, as you pointed out, Chris is asking, are you a plotter, a pantser, a hybrid? So Sam, I think in Grace, we heard from you both that you do a mixture of both. Barbara, what about you?
I was reading the questions. Can you just ask me that again?
Yeah, are you a plotter, a pantser, or do you?
I'm very much, I pantsed until I have to plot. Absolutely. In fact, I have found what works really well for me is I will pants and then I get stuck and then I start doing an outline from the very beginning. And that actually, I don't lose a lot that way. I may rearrange some things, but it finally gets me the way through the rest of the book. I mean, I generally know how the story is going to end and I know how it's going to start. That middle stuff gets a little shaky, but I'm hybrid. I definitely cannot be a total plotter and I can't be a total pantster. So I am hybrid.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Julie?
I do it all based on what's needed at the moment. I mean, for myself, intuitively, if it helps me to pants a little bit to get into the story or to capture voice, I'll do it. If I'm stuck, outlining helps. If it's a broken part in the book, I need to discover. So discovery writing is good for pantsing. So I think I'm mostly just aware of all of the different strategies, and I'll just pull from the toolbox which tool I need at that particular time. And it could be dependent on me if I'm just in a certain mood, or it could be what's happening in the story.
Okay.
So I just use what I need when I need it.
And Mary, you?
I would say pretty much the same as Julie, although I imagine it looks different when we do it, because just because we're doing the same thing doesn't mean it manifests the same. But like I usually start with discovery writing, and then I make a plot, and then I start writing my draft. But my plot is usually like the big plot points for, here's my plot, here's my inciting incident, here's my plot point 1, here's my midpoint, that kind of thing. And only like for act 1 do I have like, this is what I'm going to do in each scene. So once I get through act 1, then I'll say, okay, let's like take act 2. And often I have to restructure things because things didn't exactly go the way I thought they would. And so I'll restructure the big things as needed. And then I'll make the smaller, outline for act 2 before I start writing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everybody's really very much a mixture. And I think I've noticed here that most people start off discovery kind of writing to get into it and find out what's going to happen, and then come back and start to refine and work on that storyline, that plot line. Sophie Lee Fox is asking, can you further define what a multiverse means? Is it the same as time travel? So multiverse, in my understanding, is that there's lots of different universes all happening at the same time, and if you're writing a big epic fantasy, perhaps the characters jump from universe to universe, and there's different types of characters or civilizations going on simultaneously. I don't know if anybody has another way of describing it or a better way of describing it, but that's my understanding. And we got Linda. Linda Rosen has asked a question. Hi, Linda. She's asking, has your why for why you were writing, why you sit at your computer typing out words, changed from when you began to now? And Mandy, I'll put that question to you.
Can you repeat that? I was reading the chat.
Ladies,
my
concentrate. Linda's asking, has your why you write, has it changed between when you started 12 years ago and now, and when you write now? Why you write now, rather?
You know, it's so funny. I just had this conversation with an author last night who is fantastic and hitting the ground hard and working really hard to make a name, like it's a dream that's coming true. And it's like, shoot, I'm so lucky. I just want people to read my stories. It's never changed. So I don't feel a big pressure. I just love it when people read what I've written and I get those messages where they connected and it made them feel something. That's it. That's why I hope it never changes. I hope it's always that.
Yeah, because it sounds like it keeps it comes when that's the reason. Yay. We're on the hour. Do you mind staying to answer one more question that's come in? From Dennis Conlon, who's asking, does the advice you give to clients always come from your own method of working? So I'm not sure actually here who else coaches or teaches writing, but I'll start with Sam, because I know that you are a coach. Does it come from your own method of writing, or how do you teach?
It's a hybrid
method.
Yeah, it's a hybrid. So a lot of it does come from my own experience because, I've been through the ringer with this draft of this first book that I'm working on. I'm on, no joke, revision number 18 or something. It's insane. And I learned so much from writing that book. And so I pick and choose those lessons that might apply to somebody who's in a certain place. Also, Author Accelerator trained me to work a certain way, and they don't prescribe how you have to do it. You kind of pick and choose what works for you. And so the way that I coach is a hybrid of, me learning. Somebody said in the chat, we're always learning. I learn every day. I attend as many panels as I can. I read craft books like nobody's business. We all do, right? And so I'm always looking for little tidbits. It's been fascinating hearing how you all work. So yes and no is the answer to that.
Does anybody else coach or teach here? I'm not sure. Yay, Mandy.
Well, I do, and it just sort of happened because people asked me if I would, because they like how laid back, it's like, I think I'd be like your favorite teacher, they never gave you any tests or, because I think what's most important, I tell everybody, is do not overthink it. You can drive yourself nuts, and you can put off writing a story or your book for years because you're too worried about all. The pages are not going to go old. They're not going to go stale. They're not going to grow mold. I mean, they're going to be there. You can always go back and change them. They're never, it's just write the story and don't worry about all the little detail stuff. So I'm like the most, that's like the dude.
And Mary, is that your hand up too?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of what Mandy just said, because it's something I personally struggle with a little bit, is this idea of feeling like I need to hurry up and get it done and be productive. And I was talking to my grandmother last night. She's 101 next month. Wow. And she says, how's the writing going? And I was like, well, it's going, but it's really slow. And she's like, you got nothing but time. And somehow having a 101-year-old tell me I got nothing but time was a little, I don't know, attitude check for me. I got nothing but time. No one's sitting around waiting for this book. If it takes me as long as it takes me. So, and I have that luxury, so I should chill out.
Anybody else teach, coach? Yeah, well, I'll just put
Okay.
my 2 pence in. My coaching comes from my own experiences of writing and what I've learned the hard way. And then, of course, studying craft, studying all the books. I too have done all the webinars, downloaded all the cheat sheets and all the rest of it. And now I am also learning to coach, or leveling up my coaching, or learning a new way of coaching through Author Accelerator as well, which has been eye-opening, really, really eye-opening, and I'm really grateful for it too. So not only does it help me with my own writing, but I can pass that on to my students as well, which I love. So yeah, so a mixture of everything. Right, well, I will leave it there. We've gone past the hour. I want to thank everybody, Mary, Sam, Grace, Barbara, Julie, Mandy. Thank you so much for your time today. I really do appreciate you being here with me. And of course, everybody who's watching, thank you for turning up live. If you couldn't make it with us live, there will be a replay, so don't worry, keep your eyes peeled, and it will be with you soon. So I hope to see some of you tomorrow, but for the meantime, have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.